I'm Neil Acharya.
And I am Nate Sager.
Welcome to SportsLit. Today we go off the beaten path, a place I enjoy trekking, as does our guest, Phil Lind, the Vice Chair of Rogers Communications Incorporated. He helped build this company from the ground up with CEO Ted Rogers, beginning when he joined the corporation in 1969. Today we know the company is a behemoth, along with Bell and perhaps TELUS, but as we find out in his new book, Right Hand Man, written along with Bob Brehl, there are many parallels, a word I'm sure we'll use often today, with the early days of this company and the Wild West backdrop we're familiar with when it comes to thinking about tech startups. So what's his relationship with sports? Well, where do we start? Rogers, of course, owns the Blue Jays, Nate. And then, of course, don't forget the national rights to air hockey, including the crown jewel of Canadian sports broadcasting properties, Hockey Night in Canada. And I think they also own the naming rights to several stadiums.
Yeah, Rogers Arena, Rogers Place, Rogers Center. There used to be the Rogers K-Rock Center in Kingston. It's now the Leon Center, but yeah,
they lost that one. We'll find out. We'll get to the bottom of how they lost the naming rights.
That was the big. That was the big one there.
Rogers also created the ill-fated Bills in Toronto series, and Phil has been there the entire time, behind the scenes and sometimes in front of the camera for these developments. In 2002, he was awarded the Order of Canada, and in 2012, inducted into the U.S. Cable Hall of Fame, the third Canadian to be bestowed with that honor. Today, we welcome him to SportsLit, along with award-winning journalist Bob Brehl, and they're going to discuss the book, sports, and, of course, the business of sport. Nate?
Yes, and eager to get into this. Part of the power of memoir, whether it's, a scientist, a business executive, a celebrity, an athlete, is, it brings you closer to understanding someone who, just rolls with a different crowd than you do. You get an idea of their, needs and their obligations and sort of, how they, concentrate the ideas that are within them. Some days it feels like we're losing ground on that front as a species. I think in terms of how memoir works and the power of it, I think The Triumph of Narrative by Robert Fulford is a great book. Phil Lind is one of my influencers of my early years. The novelist W.P. Peart would simply call a heavy hitter, no exposition needed. That makes him, I guess, a bit of a heavy, in plotting terms to sports fans. Rogers and the Jays. I mean, there's still people who chafe a little bit at how intertwined, the corporate and the sports side of that are. There was, the Bills in Toronto series, which is something he writes about and I guess wears to this day. I guess those are our primary points of reference for Phil. And I didn't know too much else about him other than, big executive guy, but there's a lot more to Phil as he reveals. Then being a business person, big supporter of the arts. He writes in the book, he touches on his early life and how, he was able to sort of get in the door, but it took him a while to figure out where he fit in the grand scheme. But he ended up being, part of this, the buildup of this huge company. And obviously he talks about something else that is, defining a major health crisis that was having a stroke in 1998, when he was 54 years old. And I mean, there's a lot of inside baseball in this book. We talked, the deal making that took Rogers from this small company to this, I guess, 5 platform hydra, or is it 7 or 8 platforms now? You can learn definitely a lot about organizational behavior, and I guess the art of the deal from Phil and Robert Brehl's narrative. It's not just about saying, hey, we're a company with a lot of money and we're going to do this. You have to finesse things, make everyone feel like they're getting 70% of the deal. So there's a lot that goes into convincing the CRTC to amend broadcast policy. There were a lot of things I didn't know about how Rogers, because it always felt like just one day all of a sudden Rogers signs were everywhere.
Right.
But there was a lot to go that went into that. So our framing device is always the sports stuff, but there was a lot more for the mind in Right Hand Man, which is an offering from Barlow Books. The title's actually a double entendre too, because I guess after Phil survived his stroke, he actually had to learn to write left-handed, but he was always the right-hand man of Ted Rogers, but lost the use, I guess, of his right hand hand in that. So that's certainly inspirational that he was able to, bounce back up, forgive the cliche, but he was buckled by this major life thing and came back. Sorry to reduce that health crisis to a platitude. Anyways, we're definitely eager to have him here for I guess what will be our last one of the calendar year 2018. We should mention, we record in the Reference Library here in downtown Toronto. Next week, something that's kind of right up our alley. The Toronto Reference Library is hosting a discussion salon called The Woke Sports Fan, led by Morgan Campbell from the Toronto Star and Stacey May Fowles, author of Baseball Life Advice, who was our third ever guest on SportsLit. They will discuss how to be a socially conscious sports fan in the wake of anthem protests, concussions, and more. And the fact that they use the label anthem protest tells us how much this is needed, because obviously they're inequality protests. But that's an event December 10th, 7 to 8 p.m. in Beaton Hall. That's Beeton, not the homonym. That's an event we felt like we should plug that, because that's right in the wheelhouse of what we do here on SportsLit, Neil.
Absolutely, Nate, and I can't thank the library enough for hosting us here and giving us this platform in this room to do this broadcast in. And on that note, we're not too far away either from One Mount Pleasant, the headquarters of Rogers the corporate headquarters of Rogers, where of course Phil Lind makes his presence felt, and that's his home in terms of business. And he's going to make his way over here, and we're gonna have a chat with him coming up on SportsLit. Well, thanks for joining us, Bob and Phil. As you can see, we've set this room up to make it seem as though we are in a CRTC hearing. Not exactly. Kidding aside, the first question is for Bob. Can you explain your path in the media industry from going into traditional media with the Star and the Globe to the point where you've gotten to now, where you've done these biographies with Phil, and before that with Ted Rogers?
I worked, as you say, at the Toronto Star and the Globe and Mail, and then I moved to a online portal called Canoe, and at the .com bust in 2000, I went and worked for a PR firm, which didn't exactly work out after 18 months or so. And then after that, I've just been working as a freelance writer and consultant for the last, 15, 16 years.
And what makes right here, right now, a good time to tell Phil's life story?
From my perspective, well, Phil's... You just turned 75 years old, and he's achieved a heck of a lot. And I'll say this: the name Phil Lind does not resonate as big as Ted Rogers or Hazel McCallion to the general public, but his story is just so fascinating because he is a very multi-dimensional person: business, arts and culture, crazy sports fan. But Phil, why don't you take it from there?
Phil, why was right now the time to write the book?
It was 10 years of Ted's death as of yesterday.
Yes.
One of the things that really motivated me was that the millennials who work at Rogers have no idea that Rogers didn't exist 40, 50 years ago. It didn't exist. They've always thought of Rogers, they think of Rogers as Rogers, Bell, and Telus. They've always been there, but they haven't been there. This is a one-generation story.
Readers, of course, this is SportsLit, so I'm just going to switch gears. Readers only need to read the first page of this book before sports is mentioned, and that's in the foreword by our current mayor, John Tory, who says, quote, Phil, this is you, his impact on Canadian sports is enormous, end quote. He then cites ensuring the Jays stayed in Canada, the NFL in Toronto series, and NFL Sunday Ticket, and also introducing regional sports networks to Canada and the creation of Sportsnet. So with that said, could I get you to travel back in time and kind of explain what the landscape was like in media and where sports stood, if at all, at the beginning when you started in
Well,
the,
at
in
the
the 70s?
beginning, sports was always on the major broadcasting stations. And then the CRTC licensed TSN finally, after ESPN had been licensed in the States for years. But then they said TSN's going to be the monopoly here. That's going to be it. And I've talked to guys in the States, and they said, no, we should have competition here. And so I certainly believed that, and Ted believed that. So we started in to apply. But, in those days, cable being the bad guy could only own 19% of the network. So even though we designed it and built it and created it, we could only own 19%. So, but eventually the CRTC, as they always do, finally realized the right position. But my God, it took a while.
So the genesis for Sportsnet or for competition to TSN came from an American idea then?
Peter, myself and a guy who ran the U.S. Sports Network for Fox.
And that was, if you don't mind me asking, I think it's in the book. I just forget the name. You mentioned somebody in the States calling you about this, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Peter Barton.
Yeah, Peter Barton.
I'm going to ask you, how did the Thrilla in Manila change the programming universe? Because that's a line from this book. When HBO broadcast it in 1975.
Well, that was the first time that satellite and was brought back live, and so that was the beginning of cable
HBO.
Of HBO, which was the forerunner of cable channels.
Yeah.
Now, something that just blew me away when I read it, again, as someone who didn't know all this industry stuff, was the fact that it took so long in Canada for them to allow cable operators to actually move into programming. What was the fight like that to convince the CRTC to see the light?
It probably took 20, 25 years to allow us into programming. It's just crazy. But they thought that they've got to protect the Canadian broadcaster against any kind of competition. So CTV and Global were their sacred cows, and the CBC, of course. And that was it, man. I mean, and if you weren't on there, you weren't on. And it was pathetic, but that was the case.
And how did that shape like Canadian minute? How did that time lapse, the delay in getting that? How do you think that's shaped the media industry in Canada?
Well,
good or bad?
Bad because it's, good because it's created some Canadian-owned program stations, but bad because it's created an artificial construct. And anytime artificiality rules, everything, the marketplace is not recognized, so things get screwy. Things get real screwy.
Bob, I'm going to ask you a question now. In terms of parallels, and you didn't hear the intro me and Nate recorded earlier, but we talked a lot about parallels in this book. And there's a parallel in the narrative between Phil and his grandfather, Johnny, I believe, who hit gold in the Klondike in 1896, which was the height of the gold rush. And that made a lot of money. Now, I wanted to know, did you see a similarity in the landscape of TV in the sense of when Phil entered TV, how raw it was and new? Did you see that at all, or am I stretching that?
No, I think that's a valid point. Well, first I'll go back to what Phil had just been saying. Rogers, and I guess other cable companies, but Rogers in the 70s was doing programming that was so far ahead of everybody else. Even the Americans were not doing a certain program. And what they were doing turned into things that we take for granted today, like a movie channel, like a country and western channel, all these things that they were doing. But each time the CRTC said, nope, you got to take that off because the broadcasters would complain. So your question about parallels with, to me it was more Phil's grandfather and the gold rush for the cable licenses in the U.S. Not per se in Canada. Correct me if I'm wrong, Phil, but the U.S., because cable developed more slowly in the U.S. than in Canada, it took Ted Turner and the super channels to really ignite cable in the U.S. Up until that point, the concentration of population was closer, so therefore there wasn't as great a demand. In Canada, even Toronto, you would get ghosty images from Buffalo and things like that, and people wanted American program. But so think of Edmonton. Edmonton probably couldn't get any channels, any American channels. So there was this demand for cable in Canada that pushed cable in Canada about 10 years ahead of the U.S.
I thought of a parallel when I read about the early days of Rogers and the camaraderie and the bun fights, for example, and what you see with Mark Zuckerberg and a keg stand, with Facebook. It almost felt similar, like those days were like what the tech startup days are kind of like now.
Wild West. Yep, very, very true.
Now, now you obviously get into the point where, just take it to the point when Rogers was acquiring the Blue Jays. It says there was a lot of skepticism in the finance sort of community. That sort of blows my mind, because they've owned the team now for 2 decades. We see what the synergies that creates. What did people not see at the time that led them to be skeptical? Well,
they were skeptical, all right, and even in our board for years thereafter. Almost every other meeting, someone would say, "Ted, when are we going to get rid of the Blue Jays? Why do we have the Blue Jays?" And Ted would always turn to me and say, "Phil, this is exactly the question that you want to answer." And I'd talk about brand and halo effect and things like that. But actually, people were very skeptical of, Ted wanted it because he wanted to keep baseball in Canada, number one. And number two, he wanted it because he didn't know anything about baseball. Not a damn thing. But he knew about the business of sport. And he knew that people had to watch it live. And what better way to watch it live than either Rogers cameras or Rogers receivers? You had to have Rogers in there somewhere. So that's what he did. Eventually, the board finally gave up when all of a sudden somebody said, "This franchise is worth $1 billion," and everyone's shut up at that point and said, "Ooh." Did someone question whether the Blue Jays were fitted into Rogers? I can't remember that.
Can I add one thing, though,
yes,
to that?
Absolutely.
If going back to 2000, what Phil said earlier, that the millennials today think of Rogers as this giant, huge company. In 2000, it was a very big company, but it was also really steeped in debt. It was not an investment-grade company. And therefore, the Bay Street, the analysts and those sorts of people would say, "Why are you doing this? Baseball's a money-losing operation for you guys."
And they didn't realize also that because we'd been kiboshed with the Videotron takeover, Ted was awarded $150 million and $125 million in breakup fees. And one thing about Ted Rogers is, if you were standing still, if you were playing it like yesterday, right, you were standing still, you were losing. You were losing ground. So $125 million, let's spend it. Let's grow the company. That's what he was always doing, growing the company.
Spending money to make money.
You bet.
I think it was around 2001 and 2 as well. I think MLB Commissioner Bud Selig said, well, all digital revenue was... the MLB made a lot of rules about digital revenue. How did that help with growing the equity in the Blue Jays?
Well, Paul Beeson actually set up the BAM, baseball asset man or baseball
Baseball
Advanced
Advanced
Media.
Media.
advanced media,
MLB Advanced Media.
advanced media, yeah. And it was a little slow to take off, but boy, did it take off. And it's worth billions and billions of dollars now. So, and in digital rights, I mean, we had the digital rights because we had the stadium, we had the broadcast network, and we owned the team. So they couldn't say to us, well, we have to clear it through somebody else. We had everything. So we were the first digital broadcasters with baseball for years before any other team in baseball had it.
It's interesting that you mentioned Videotron inadvertently helping you guys by the Blue Jays. But with the Rogers Hockey Night deal, a French company directly helped get those rights in TVR, correct?
Absolutely. We needed that. We needed that portion, and we got it.
I'm gonna switch gears a little here and get directly into the fandom of sports, if you don't mind. And I'm no Mildred Schwab, but allow me to challenge you a little bit here, Phil. And I would say a lot of fans would look at the current Blue Jays and say they had a winning formula with Paul Beeston and Alex Anthopoulos, and both played very nice on their way out. But were they shown the door so Rogers could have more control over the team?
No.
Okay.
We loved Paul and we loved Alex, and we still do. And they are central. They've always been central to the Blue Jays. Paul retired, and Mark was brought in, and Mark offered Alex the general managership, but Alex said, "Sounds to me like Mark is the general manager too." So I don't want to work under those circumstances. But it was all fairly genial, and Alex went off to the Dodgers, and now, of course, is spectacular performer at the Atlanta Braves. So now Mark with Ross Atkins they've struggled, but I think they're going to bring us a winning baseball team. But it's taken a couple of years.
And I might add, too, that Phil and Paul Beeson are still quite close. They're good friends. Paul was at Phil's birthday party not that long ago.
Happy birthday, Phil. I did not know your birthday was recently. That's not that long ago. Bob, I actually got to ask you a question quickly regarding Paul Godfrey, who's also mentioned in the book. Do you have any personal thoughts, because you were a former member of the print media, of what Paul is doing right now at the helm of Post Media, and you may not have any thoughts, and that's fair too.
Well, no, I don't have any serious thoughts. I know he's taken some bonuses while laying people off, and a lot of those people that he laid off were former colleagues of mine. But it's a tough racket nowadays.
Well, certainly for those that haven't read the book, there's some interesting points in there about Paul. I'll let you read the book to find those out. Go ahead, Nate.
Indeed. Now, by coincidence, we're talking about anniversaries and whatnot, but it was 10 years ago this week. The first Bills-Toronto series regular season game was played in Toronto, and I think about 4 years ago this week that it ran its course. Bob, I just wonder, for your perspective, what do you think? Why it played out the way it did?
Well, this is where Phil and I have divergent views on it.
That's great.
I happen to think that Ontario, the GTA, loves the NFL, but they don't love the Bills. They like, they're Steelers fans or Browns fans or Dolphins fans or Cowboys fans, and I just don't think they cared about the Buffalo Bills, in my opinion.
Well, in my defense, first of all, the the long-term plan was to get the Bills to Toronto. So you have to do it in whatever way you think is possible. Ted Rogers and Ralph Wilson had a love affair. They were a real bromance. and if Ted and Ralph were still alive, I mean, let me put it this way: Ralph died, and then Ted died. Unfortunately,
No, it was the other way around.
Huh?
It was the other way around.
Yeah, but that's right. But what I wanted to say, sorry, I meant that. What I wanted to say is that if Rogers had been alive when Wilson's estate was being settled, that might have been a different story. But in any case, Toronto has to have an NFL team. It just has to. It's the fourth largest population base in North America. For God's sakes, we have to have an NFL team here. And Canada, by and large, except for Calgary, Edmonton, and Regina, maybe Winnipeg, possibly Ottawa. I mean, this is an NFL community now, and Toronto will never go back to the CFL. Never. It's all NFL, and Vancouver as well.
Now, I'll add, too, that in Phil's defense, that you got hit with a lot of bad luck with that series because they were lousy games, they were lousy Bills teams.
That's right. They were lousy games, they were lousy Bills teams, and they were at the end of the season. So they were already... Bills were out of it already when they came up here to play, and actually, a lousy Bills attitude sometimes.
Yeah, that's true.
Too. Because you look to anything to be an excuse, and in this case, one or two of the players said, "Well, Toronto doesn't act like Buffalo. It doesn't have a winning, they don't roar enough." And actually, they don't. But because they were mediocre teams, why would they roar?
Now, as someone who spent so much time in the United States with work, especially in the 80s, like, how much were you surprised that there was that sort of, I guess, Canadian-U.S. kind of culture clash with that?
I think if we'd had the Pittsburgh Steelers up here, everyone would have been cheering madly. I mean, they wanted a winning team. Everybody wants a winning team. It's not Canada and the U.S. I mean, they're combined. I mean, they're the same.
I'm gonna get you to travel back in a second to kind of get into how the whole series started and your role in it, but I want to examine authenticity, because I thought that might have been one of the reasons why the games didn't succeed here, because a lot of people like going to Ralph Wilson Stadium and tailgating, and a lot of people said, hey, it was kind of a corporate environment here when Rogers Center hosted those Bills games. Do you think authenticity had anything to do with it?
Well, I mean, I guess if you like tailgating down at Ralph Wilson Stadium, I don't know. I didn't. But this was not a corporate thing in Canada. It was the law in Canada. Mm-hmm. In the United States, the police officers wave these guys off, wave these guys onto the thruway and everything. They're just absolutely plastered. In Canada, you wouldn't have the same sort of situation. You can't drink in public and things like that. I mean, it's a different. We have different laws in Canada, and we have different ways of deporting ourselves.
You talked about Ralph and Ted and how in their relationship and kind of how there could have been a chance had Ted been alive to get the team here. But I want to. I lost my train of thought. I was going to ask you. What was I going to ask you? I can't believe I lost my train of thought.
Look, even if Ted hadn't have got the Bills, he would have been competitive, and he could have, and and he would have been respected by the owners, by the other team owners, and they would have made sure that Ted was front and center whenever any transaction came about.
Nate?
Yeah, indeed. I'm just flashing back on my tailgating experience at Ralph Wilson. Someone's just like, "Yeah, we'll be in this parking lot," and it's just kind of a free for all. I'm like, "Wow, this is like, it's like very tribal." But go on.
I know what I wanted to ask. I was going to get you to travel back and explain how the whole Bills in Toronto series started and your involvement with that.
Well, we had long wanted an NFL franchise, and Buffalo was looking pretty shaky at the time, and so we went down and talked to their people in Buffalo and Detroit, and arranged this series in Canada. It didn't turn out, but I don't regret it, and frankly, I'm still of the opinion that we are going to have an NFL team here.
I think a lot of people will be happy to hear that. I'm going to switch gears again to the Rogers deal for the NHL broadcasting rights. We had David Schultz, who, Bob, you probably know, on SportsLit probably 2 months ago. And I want to ask you, because there's been a lot of debate about it, was it a good deal?
Oh, sure, it's a good deal, but it's not. It's a fair deal if no Canadian teams are in the playoffs. It's a great deal if Canadian teams are in the playoffs, and it doesn't matter which team. And the more the merrier, and the deeper they get into the playoffs, the better. And boy, it looks like it's going to be a good year this year.
The question I asked David, and I'm thrilled to ask you because you probably have a better answer than David, just because you're on the inside and he's on the outside. Now I'm talking about David Schultz. And how I mean, most people will say Canada has a conservative business culture. How does Keith Pelley and Scott Moore and whoever else was involved convince a stalwart, a behemoth like Rogers, to shell out this kind of money?
Well, because we had shelled out to NFL and NHL rights before on more than one occasion. Remember, Sportsnet was built on the fact that the NHL was there. It was not even launched at the time. It was licensed but not launched, and it was going to be fairly tricky for us to get going. And all of a sudden, Bettman called me up one day and said, would you like the NHL rights? And I said, you bet. And one thing led to another, and we got them. And with that one action, we got Sportsnet launched. And so we'd already stepped up to the plate.
And that was in 1998, right, when you launched it the first time. But when you saw a figure like $5.2 billion, what was your reaction when you saw that?
It's a number, that's all.
Okay.
I remember back in '98, I was at the Globe's Report on Business as a reporter, and when news broke about about Rogers getting the NHL rights, it moved the stock, and significantly. Although the stock was not worth very much back then, but it did. It was big news on. So Rogers Phil and Rogers had history with Gary Bettman.
From a personal perspective, you were there when Rogers was broadcasting pay-per-view San Antonio Spurs games. So this getting Hockey Night in Canada must have been a feather in the cap, and possibly a bit of pride to stick it to longtime rival Bell. I mean, was there any of that?
Oh, yeah.
Go ahead, Nate.
And I obviously, what I got really a lot from the book was a lot about, leadership and workplace culture. I wondered, Phil, if you could sort of talk about how you spotted what I think you called it soft skills in people and
Emotional
emotional intelligence. How much do you think that played into the fact people always recognized too that you had a great ability to sort of recognize the talents of women when at a time when many people didn't?
Well,
Or look the other way.
first,
I guess.
I'll talk about work-life balance for a second. We had a conference in Vancouver, and Ted and I were on the stage, and Philippe de Gaspé, Beaubien's wife, asked Ted, could you explain what your feeling is re work-life balance? And Ted was, what's work-life balance? I don't understand what work-life balance is. You know, Ted worked. It was just a tremendous workaholic. He worked 15 hours a day every day of his life. So I mean, he was not the model for work-life balance. Put it that way. But soft skills. Yeah, you need that. You need that to understand people and to get the best out of them, for sure.
And did you think that was, I guess, something that was why people sort of hailed you for being inclusive, being ahead of your time with that?
I think so, and I was way ahead in terms of having women. We had Carol Taylor on our board and several others. I mean, Pat Carney. I mean, some strong women who were really first-class contributors.
Speaking of strong women, you're a lifelong, I'm getting somewhere with this, you're a lifelong fan of the Cleveland Browns, and we all heard, and you knew the late Art Modell, we heard this crazy rumor about Condoleezza Rice going to the Browns. Now, we know she's not going to be the head coach, but would you like to see someone like Condoleezza be involved with the Browns in a corporate perspective?
Not necessarily. Condoleezza, I don't really, I don't have as much regard for her as I would say other women. She's a very right-wing person, and I think, I mean, I heard this story about Condoleezza the other day that really sort of solidified when George H.W. Bush, when they started tearing down the Berlin Wall, Condoleezza Rice burst into the room and said, "Come on, let's get on a plane. Let's go to Berlin. Let's celebrate this and everything." And George H.W. Bush said, "No. Let's let it lie. I mean, this is going to happen anyway. Let's not stir up the pot here. Let's just let things go." And that was the right move. If he'd stormed into Berlin and said, "You see, you guys are wrong and we're right," I mean, it would have exacerbated tensions right away.
I wanted to ask you, this has to do with politics actually. You talk about the parallels between sports teams and business teams, but you point out that in politics, in sports and business, only a player worthy can step into the arena, whereas in politics, you may have, it's not necessarily the case. Could you explain that?
I think are you referring to the point, on the campaign?
Well, I
as
think
part
there
of
was a point there
political
where a point is made that sports teams and business teams, no one can let the other guy down, and there's no hangers on. Whereas in politics,
there is.
Yeah, I don't think Phil ever indicated that people who step into the ring and run for office. He's talking about the bagmen and people like that.
Periphery.
Yeah,
exactly. Hangers on. Well, there's a lot of that in politics. Let's put it that way.
Well, you know what? I've got one last question here, but you can go too. But before I do that, we like to give a gift to our guests. So first, Bob, I'm going to give you your gift for coming on the show today. This is Dan Robson, who was on our podcast. That's the Johnny Bauer biography, or,
nice.
or biography. Not
He lived in Mississauga, where I live.
There you go. So enjoy that. And Phil, we know you're obviously, politics and sport are your interests, and so I was racking my brains. What do I give the guy that has everything? So we donated $25 to the Phil Lind Chair in United States Politics and Representation Endowment. So there you go.
And UBC.
At UBC, yes.
Yeah, thank you.
No problem. I wish the taxable receipt was in your name. Unfortunately, it's in my name. But that's just proof that we did it. But you can throw it out after if you want.
Right.
And anyway, go ahead, Nate.
Now, there's one question I did want to ask about Ted Rogers and a term that you used. I think it was something called permanent dissatisfaction. What did that concept embody, and is it a good thing? Is it an overall good thing?
Yeah, it's a good thing because Ted was never satisfied with anything, ever. No matter how good it was never good enough. And that has its own sort of frustrations. But, in terms of cable and wireless customer service, we're not good enough. And Ted knew that. He always said we weren't good enough, and he pushed and pushed to get things better. And we're still doing that. So you've got to have a lot of dissatisfaction because otherwise, if you're satisfied, then you quit. And that's not Ted Rogers. He just wanted to get bigger and better, but he wanted to make sure that people were happy, and I don't think they're all that happy yet. So
now, on a personal level, something that hit home to me was when you talked about your stroke. I had a grandparent on each side of the family who had one. I really took away from that you can never really understand what the person has gone through, but you write about it. What points do you hope stay with readers, that what they appreciate most about what you called that massive intervention in your life?
Well, it is, I never wish a stroke on anyone. It is a life-altering experience, especially when you have a bad one, like I did. Like I couldn't walk, I couldn't talk. I had to, I couldn't write, I couldn't do anything. I couldn't speak. So getting back is hard to do, and it involves not just you, but a lot of people around you, the people that support you and help you, and that's how you make it. But it's tough. It's tough.
Bob, I want to ask you. It's usually a question we ask off the top, but I'll ask it now. Could you kind of go through the process of writing this book with Phil? How it went about. Was it in person, over the phone? How long it took? That type of thing.
I would go to Phil's apartment. I think virtually every meeting was at your condo, a couple in your office maybe, and we never did anything over the phone, although I did interview other people who are in the book over the phone, people in Vancouver and Oregon and Chicago. Then I would, we'd also have other people come to his apartment when we were, and which really helped the process, I think, because we kept things were bouncing off everybody. And I would go home and I would record them all, and I'd download the recording on my computer, and then I'd go through it and make a loose transcription. And I found that during the writing process, when I would go back to those interviews, we were laughing all the time. It was fun, and I would start laughing. And my wife sometimes she'd hear me in my office laughing, and she'd say, "Who are you talking to? Who are you?" And I said, "I'm just like Ken Engelhardt or Tony Viner, Colin." They all got me like re-listening to those interviews. Just got me laughing. We did have a lot of fun.
Oh yeah, we had a great deal.
Well, it was definitely a lot of fun to read it, especially as me and Nate say, we didn't always know the business aspect of what was going on. So that was particularly enjoyable. And I would ask you both, is there anything you'd like to add before we close out here? No?
Well, I would say to your earlier question about to Phil, what can people take away from the book? I think his mother's advice of never giving up. I think that's, if you have a stroke, or my wife's mother has had a stroke, and it's that aspect that you don't give up, and that your life after a stroke, as Phil has shown, there's purpose in your life, and there's things that it doesn't just end. It's not necessarily a waiting period until the ultimate end. So, and he wouldn't say it because he hates being a poster child for disability or stroke victims. He hates those words, but he is, and there's a lot of people who view him that way.
Thanks for joining us, gentlemen. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thanks.